You've heard of the hero's journey. You may even have lived your own version of it. But are you aware of the hero's two shadow sides, the darker, more destructive versions of this archetype that also reside in your unconscious mind? Because if not, then you are not safe from their clutches. This video is about how to guard yourself against the inner coward and the inner bully. My name is Hazel Gale. I'm a former therapist turned author and creator of the fantasy mental health game Betwixt. And this series of videos is devoted to the, in my opinion, fascinating world of archetypal character arcs. These are the archetypal journeys taken by characters so familiar to us from myth and tradition and religious teachings and every other type of story, that they exist within us as shared parts of the personality. Alive in what Jung called the collective unconscious, archetypes influence every part of our world, from our self-image through to our life choices, our beliefs about what we can and cannot do, what we do and do not deserve. The hero's journey, or warrior's journey as I'm calling it, is undoubtedly the best known archetypal character arc. Arguably present in some way in the vast majority of movies you've ever seen and novels you've read. Even if you don't know the story's plot points consciously, you definitely know them unconsciously. But, and this is a really important but, even though we all know this story unconsciously, unless we actively choose to bring it into our conscious awareness, it could end up doing us more harm than good. Because the warrior has multiple faces. And if you don't shine a light on all three versions of this archetype, then it may not be the warrior's path that you walk, but the coward's or the bully's. In a nutshell, this is how the story goes. The warrior's story is a quest, potentially taken psychologically whenever we follow an urge for adventure or growth. This journey asks us to face the evil dragon of the ego's temptation to hoard glory, to make some kind of sacrifice in order to rescue the healing elixir from its clutches, and to return to the village not just a saviour, but a more mature, responsible human being. And as part of this story, the warrior will discover their great personal power. This is a good thing, but it's also dangerous. Should the warrior not master the responsible use of this power, then it will pose as great a threat to the village as the mighty dragon. The meaning here is obvious. We all have the power to control and or hurt those around us. Whether this is the power of our sexuality, intellect, physical strength, wealth, privilege, or the ability to manipulate and abuse, we all have the potential to do great damage in the name of personal gain. And if we fall prey to the temptation to shortcut our way to power or success or whatever, then we will slip, temporarily or indefinitely, into one of the two shadow archetypes for this leg of the journey. The coward, which represents a passive refusal to take responsibility, or the bully, an aggressive refusal to take responsibility. A quick note that these two characters are archetypal models or concepts. They aren't personality types, but potential modes that we could all slip into if we're not careful. So, the coward. This one is pretty self-explanatory. The coward is a warrior who fails to mature into a responsible adult because, for whatever reason, they lack the courage to do so. There are two ways the coward archetype can occur in a story. They could either be an older version of the naïf, the passive shadow of the previous archetype. Having failed to complete their tenderfoot's journey, they are unable to level up to warrior because they don't have the strength of self to do so, and so are forced to take the cowardly route instead at this point. Alternatively, the coward could represent a warrior's fall from grace, a failure to complete this archetypal journey. In reality, of course, things are not so black and white or straightforward. As with all the archetypes and their shadows, the coward is a psychic aspect of who we are. We all have an inner wimp who'd really rather not do the thing, thank you very much. Surely we will all embody this archetype from time to time, and I would hope that we'll all have the moments when we can resist the coward's call too. Because to give in to this, albeit natural urge to avoid risk, is to actively stall our own growth. To sit back and allow the greedy dragon to ransack the village until there is nothing left of the life and connection and opportunity it once represented. And so, although often personified as an external character in stories as well, think Ron Weasley from Harry Potter, Snarf in Thundercats, or C-3PO in Star Wars, or Xander in Buffy, the coward is primarily a force from within, an instinct that the warrior must learn to overcome in order to successfully complete their journey and therefore claim the reward of reintegration with the community and access to healthy, loving adult relationships. At the other end of this continuum, of course, there's the bully. The shadow result of an aggressive refusal to take responsibility and mature into adulthood and connected relationships. Think Draco Malfoy in Harry Potter, John Bender in The Breakfast Club, and Emily in The Devil Wears Prada. Just like the coward, the bully could be an older edition of the Tempest, the aggressive shadow version of the previous archetype, the Tenderfoot. Or they could be the result of the warrior's failure to resist the temptation to opt for personal power as opposed to making the self-sacrifice required to attain the elixir and save the kingdom. In either case, the bully is overcome by resentment, fear, and shame. We hugely demonize bullies in our culture, probably because we idolize the hero/warrior archetype so much. And as a result, it's easy to forget to empathize with those who exhibit bullying behaviors, including ourselves. What this means is that, collectively, we push the bully even further into the shadow, where this archetype gains even more power and shows up even more often. We really need to remember that the bully is in pain. They opt to stay stuck in this archetype, where at least they have some shred of power, even if it's an illusion, because they are afraid to accept their call to adventure and/or reintegrate at the end of the journey. The bully is afraid that they aren't enough, afraid they won't cut it, afraid of rejection. So how do we avoid the trap of the warrior's shadow selves? Well, the simple answer is to take the journey, which of course will look different for everyone, but it will start with us listening out for our respective calls to adventure. This means honouring our authentic desires, as opposed to just following the path laid out by others. A courageous act indeed, but essential if you want to avoid the clutches of the coward. Then, once on this authentic path, when our personal power starts to become apparent, as it will, in order to avoid the trap of the bully, we must rise to the challenge of accepting personal responsibility for our actions. This means that we have to acknowledge our potential to do harm. We need to take responsibility for the effect we have on others, and be prepared to self-sacrifice from time to time in order to protect those we care for. In other words, as the warrior must do in order to level up to luminary, we must learn to choose love over power. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I really hope that you find this helpful. Finally, if you'd like to take an epic journey through a magical world in the name of personal growth and wellness, then you can download Betwixt, the mental health game, which is available on the iOS App Store and Google Play.